And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I do appreciate you being with me. Now, before I get into my video, do not forget your time is running out. To take advantage of my February 2025 three-book special that is going to save you a significant amount of money. The Death of Adam and the Life of Christ. Folks, I'm not aware of another book like this. This book discusses the death of Adam in a variety of different ways, in-depth exegesis, in-depth scholarly attestation, and it examines it also through the prism of the subject of the substitutionary death of Christ. Not another book like it, okay? Then, Paul, the Pharisees and the Resurrection. And then, as a free book, my book, In Flaming Fire. Now, go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order yourself. There's a banner right at the very top. Click it. You're going to save about $12, $14, okay? Do yourself a favor. And let me say again, as I did last week, I want to thank everyone for your good response to this offer. I appreciate it so very, very much. It is very, very helpful. Okay, digging right back into yesterday, we began an examination of Daniel chapter 12, verse 7 on the timing for the fulfillment of Sukkot. Sukkot was the feast that foreshadowed the resurrection. It was the feast of harvest. And Jesus, by way of reiteration, in Matthew chapter 13 said the harvest, the fulfillment of Sukkot, would take place at the end of the age. And he quoted Daniel chapter 12 verse 3 and applied it to that event. So there's no question that in the mind of Jesus, Daniel 12, number one, would be the fulfillment of Sukkot. And number two, Daniel 12 and Sukkot would be fulfilled at the time of the end of the age. Not at the end of time, not at the end of the Christian age. You know, when I was a young man growing up, every sermon that I ever heard dealing with Matthew chapter 13 was, well, the resurrection is at the end of the current Christian age. And it never dawned on me as a young man to question that thesis. It wasn't until later that I kept reading all of these biblical passages dealing with the Messianic age that said it has no end. And I'm going, wait a minute. I have been taught and I have been teaching that the resurrection is at the end of the current Christian age. But here's the Bible affirming that the Christian age has no end. There's something wrong here. I knew it had to be something wrong with me, not the biblical text. So, heaven is quite clear in saying that the resurrection would be when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. I made passing mention a week or so ago how some commentators say, well, what this is really referring to is when the power of the persecutor is shattered. All of these things will be fulfilled. And they apply that to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So in other words, they render it as Antiochus Epiphanes is the one that brings about the great tribulation of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes, there would be resurrection. And that's the time of the end when the righteous who had resisted the pogroms of Antiochus, that's when they would shine like the stars for their faithfulness. Well, as many commentators have noted, you have to pervert the Hebrew text in order to get that rendering out of it. because the bulk of Hebrew manuscripts, the great majority of them, virtually all of them from what I've read, do not support that rendering. And I could provide quote after quote from scholars who are world-renowned Hebraists who say the only way you can get that rendering out of it, and it's their word, is to pervert the Hebrew text. Now, is that really what we want to do? Don't think so. Okay, so God said through his angel, when the power of the holy people would be completely shattered, all of these things must be fulfilled. So we need to ask ourselves some basic questions here by way of exegesis and the proper use of hermeneutic. Who are Daniel's holy people? Well, they're obviously the righteous remnant of Old Covenant Israel. I was teaching a class on one occasion from a congregation where I was eventually fired. And I went over Daniel chapter 12. And this one lady, bless her heart, she was a sweet, sweet lady, and she was extremely outspoken, but she was one of those individuals that believed she had the right to say anything to anybody at any time, any way that she wanted to say it, but nobody had a right to say anything to her. Sweet lady, really honestly was. So I went across Daniel chapter 12, pointing out it's the end of the age, pointing out it's the time of the Great Tribulation, which Jesus put in the first century. And Daniel was told all of that would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. Boy, this sweet lady basically came unglued. She said, "You are absolutely wrong." I sort of kind of expected something like that from her. And I said, "Well, can you tell me then when this passage, the resurrection, and verse 7 will be fulfilled?" She said, "Yes, it's at the end of the Christian age. It's in our future at the end of time." And I said, "Well, I once believed that that's when the resurrection would occur." But I said, let's examine that. I said, we all believe that the old law, the law of Moses, and the age of Moses and the law ended in the first century, right? Everybody's going, yeah, exactly, yeah. I said, so if we put the events of Daniel chapter 12 into our future, the resurrection into our future, then that means at the end of the Christian age, the power of the holy people, and I said, who are God's holy people right now? And a person hearing that, well, it's a church. I said, great, exactly right. So I said, if the resurrection is at the end of the Christian age, then that means that it occurs when the power of the church is completely shattered. And boy, the looks on people's faces. They saw it. They realized the problem. And this dear lady flushed red. I thought an eruption was going to take place. She just, that type of thing, and had not another word to say. And I was trying to be very gracious. I was trying to be very patient. And I just said to the class, I said, look, brethren, here's a statement concerning the resurrection that we have never, ever, ever, ever dealt with. It challenges everything that we have ever believed about the resurrection. It has certainly challenged my perspectives. And a large number of the class agreed. Some who wouldn't believe it, to state this as kindly as possible, if Daniel was standing in front of them and said, let me explain this to you. Because after all, that's not what we have always taught. No matter what the text says, it can't be right because it's not what we in our church have always taught. That's wrong. So, since it is talking about the destruction of the power of the holy people, what was the power of the righteous remnant? Or to express it even more broadly, what was Israel's power? It is absolutely amazing to me, ladies and gentlemen, that on Facebook and on YouTube, I have had any number of people tell me, well, the power was their military. No, it was not. Ladies and gentlemen, how many times was Israel overwhelmingly outnumbered? I think of Gideon and his 600 soldiers, 600 fighting men. You see, the only reason that Israel's army was ever able to defeat their overwhelmingly large enemies is because of their covenant relationship with Yahweh. The Lord said concerning Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 7, the Lord has not chosen you because you were more righteous. The Lord has not chosen you because you were greater in number. But he chose you because he made a promise to Abraham. See, that's a covenant promise. David said in Psalms 41, I believe it's verse 10, 11, by this I know that you are well pleased with me when my enemy does not triumph over me. What was David saying? David was saying, I know that when I am in a proper covenant relationship with Yahweh, I am being obedient to his word, my enemies do not beat me in battle. And we can go back to the book of Exodus, chapter 23, or is it verse 34? And the Lord made a promise to Israel that when they would observe Torah, they would observe the feast days. And the Lord said that if they would travel to the chosen place, which obviously later became Jerusalem, and observe the feast days, none of your enemies will attack you while you are there. Now that's a remarkable promise. You keep the covenant, I will not allow your enemies to invade or to attack you when you are keeping the law by keeping the feasts. You travel to Jerusalem. Keep the feast. Your enemies will not attack you, which, by the way, raises a really interesting problem for the dispensationalists. You remember the Yom Kippur War? Yom Kippur, Israel's greatest feast days. And yet, Israel's enemies attacked her. And it seemed for a couple of days they were going to be destroyed. And dispensationalists jumped all over that. And they said, see, God was protecting them. No. Had God been protecting them due to their covenant faithfulness, they never would have been attacked on Yom Kippur in the first place. That attack was proof positive, folks. Proof positive. Israel's not under covenant relationship with God today. Because if they were, God would never have allowed them to be attacked on Yom Kippur. Let that soak in. Okay, so what was the power of the holy people? It was her covenant relationship with Yahweh. Oh, and people just yell and scream and they get all upset. Oh, God would never, ever, ever break his covenant relationship with Israel. Well, as a matter of fact, God foretold the time in which he would depart from Israel. God foretold the time in which he would break the covenant bond that he had with both houses of Israel. You will need to tune in tomorrow as I share those verses with you. I'll see you on the flip side.